I know we all miss Rav Daniel and Rav Tyler, but one of the great things about vacation and time off is we get to learn with the amazing and brilliant people in Beth Am. And today, I'm so delighted we get to learn with Janaki. Thank you for teaching us today.
Thank you. Have to say, so I have given Divrei Torah. Can you all hear? Is it good? Great. Before, at my synagogue in Rockville. Wow, it's like a really big place. I also, many of you know I'm a doctor and was professor at University of Maryland. I now work at the NIH, so actually I've spoken in way bigger places than this about medicine. So I'm not afraid to be up here, but it is daunting. First off, I don't know how many of you are aware of Sefaria, which is like the coolest resource ever. Many of you I see. If you ever want to learn, oh my gosh, it's one of the very few things I actually pay for. I donate to Sefaria because they do great work. And one of the coolest things is that they've got virtually every Jewish text. They've got the Tanakh, they've got the Sidurim of all flavors. They have they have Rashi. I just hit my move goal. I guess that's good. Like, what is it telling me? The other problem, and my students in med school, I am very tangential. And some of you know, talking to me, that I am Chava is over there saying, oh yeah. So just forgive me. And as my students who were used to me would say after the fact, when they would talk to next year's students and say, oh, you're in Dr. Kuruppu's group, just go with it. It'll be okay. So I'm going to quote my students and say, just go with it, and I do have a place to go. So Sefaria also, rabbis and thought leaders and even humble people like me, and I really do feel humbled, put source sheets and commentaries on Sefaria that you can avail yourself of. And so I started looking at Rabbi Aliza Libman Baranowski, and I know a few weeks back I referenced her as well at the other synagogue, and everyone said, oh yeah, we know her, she's really great. And she wrote this for last year's reading of Balak, and it starts off, thank goodness we've arrived at the Parsha about the talking donkey. And that was exactly how I felt when Daniel gave me this portion. I'm not going to read anything more of hers, I just love that first line. So Balak, I was like, this is cool. Chukat didn't really ring a bell for me, but wow, as Abby, sorry, I'm also very bad at names. I only remember first letters of people's names, so it was like A, Abby. As Abby said, this is just chock full of cool stuff. So I just want to give a little, as I was going through the Parsha, figuring out where I was going to go with this, my eye lit upon, and unfortunately, somehow, one of the weird things here too is that sometimes if you don't upload them in order, then you have to drag them, and I didn't drag them in the right order, so I have these out of order, but that's okay. I'm sure it's fine. I don't know what 19.2 means, because it should be 22. Well, I'm going to just assume this is in order. It might not be. So there's a commentary from Rashi about Numbers 19:22, verse 9. He's quoting Elazar HaKohen to Eleazar the priest. So this is, God is designating Eleazar as the one who is going to sacrifice the red calf. And I was kind of curious about this because you read red calf and you think, oh, wait a minute, there's the golden heifer. That was like a bad thing, and this is a good thing. What's up with that? So Rashi says, just as they gathered together against Aaron, who was a priest, to force him to make the golden calf, so that's the people, obviously, but because Aaron had made the calf, this right, the right of the red calf, was not entrusted to him that it should be carried out by him, because the prosecuting counsel cannot become the defending counsel. Aaron, who had caused the sin, was not a fitting person to atone for it. Therefore, the rite had to be performed by another priest, which I thought was really pretty fascinating. Like, Aaron is still a really important person, but he's not fit to do this function, and it gets given to another. Numbers 19:2, and I don't know where this is and I don't read Hebrew numbers, so that's my failing. This is the ritual law that Adonai has commanded. Instruct the Israelite people to bring you I think this one was supposed to go first, a red cow without blemish, in which there is no defect and on which no yoke has been laid. That's right. I wanted the quote to come before the Rashi commentary. That was the whole deal. So Rashi then comments on the word red, adama. It had to be read in allusion to the idea contained in the text by Isaiah 1:18, though your sins be red as scarlet, they shall become as white as snow. So you see that sin is termed red. Again, I thought that was a really, one of the things I love about the Torah is it's very concrete, and the Torah knows that we need really concrete stuff, and we need symbols, and we understand things by color, and so that's how the Torah speaks to us in many instances. So in Sefaria, if you go nuts, you can just keep adding things, so I don't want to read all of these because there's a lot of them. But one that really struck me, let's see. Oh, yes. So I guess I'm going to, because I didn't add enough commentaries here I'm going to skip over to what I'm actually going to talk about. So Numbers 22:3, we're getting into moving from Chukat to Balak. And Moab, in 22 verse 3, Moab was alarmed because the people were so numerous. Moab dreaded the Israelites. So if you read a little bit before that, the Israelites have come through and they've conquered several people. And so Balak, in verse 22:2, that must be, that's after, sorry, I got them out of order. Balak, son of Zippor, saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites. Moab was alarmed because that people, Israel, was so numerous, and Moab dreaded the Israelites. So Balak is nervous. He doesn't think that he thinks they're gonna get conquered. And you're the ruler, and you're responsible. So what's he gonna do? So he says, he calls to Balaam, the sort of wizard magician person. And there was some commentary that I didn't copy that talked about how Balaam really did have some mystical powers in some way, shape, or form. So Balak says, come then, put a curse upon this people for me, since they are too numerous for me. Perhaps I can thus defeat them and drive them out of the land. For I know that whomever you bless is blessed indeed, and whomever you curse is cursed. A little bit of a linguistic parallel to that red sin and white is pure. Sforno comments on this verse saying, actually, Balaam's power did not consist in blessing, but in cursing people by mentioning their failings at a critical moment in God's timetable, as elaborated on by our sages in Brachot 7. This is why Balak did not demand a blessing from Balaam to make him victorious, which, as I read this, I was like, yeah, why not? why would you do the negative? Why would you say, you come and you curse these people so that I can win? You're not going to say, bless me and give me power to help me win? That's a really curious thing. Or at least to be blessed so that he could fight the Israelites to a standstill. But nonetheless, he added the words, Adati et asher tevarech. I know that word. Movarach. Yes, without vowels, no less. He did so only as a way of flattering Bilam. So I'm sorry, I'm like, this is how I talk. And I don't write anything down, so that's a problem. Now, so then this story goes on and on and on. I'm actually not going to talk about the talking donkey because it's a really cool little story. But actually, I was thinking about, so you've got a people, the Israelites, and they're approaching Moab. And Moab is terrified. And what's been happening in the news this week that has me very distressed is the ruling by the Supreme Court that Harvard and UNC no longer need to follow affirmative action. And affirmative action, as I'm sure many of you know more than I do, although, I was a child of the 70s, affirmative action was brought about, kind of right after the civil rights movement, brought about exciting change. We all thought, well, yay, we've done it. And affirmative action was the notion that kids who grow up in disadvantaged neighborhoods, kids who grow up without any model of someone who's gone to college, kids who grow up who might be smarter than any valedictorian at Harvard, never get the chance. Never get the chance because they are looked at as if they're judged purely on their grades or their SAT scores, they are never prepared to arrive at the point where they would ever be competitive. So affirmative action was about fixing that, repairing that imbalance, and trying to achieve greater equity. And so many of you know me in various ways. Many of you know me as a singer. Some of you in the congregation might think of me as the too loud singer. Some of you know me as a runner and someone who is concerned about eating right. Some of you know me as like hippie woman. Others of you know me as a doctor and as a Torah reader. You probably don't know that I dropped out of high school. I had a 2.73 grade point average in high school. I dropped out because I was bored. But my mother and my father were both graduate students at Columbia. My grandfather was a professor for many, many years until he became professor emeritus of the poli-sci department at Stanford University, no less. There was never, and I'm white, although you guys may or may not know that my name, Janaki Kuruppu, is because my father was from Sri Lanka. I don't see any Sri Lankans, although I know there are. Oh, God, you're there. There's a Sri Lankan. See, and I'm also a Sri Lankan. And if you don't know where Sri Lanka is, ask us. So my dad was a Sri Lankan. He came to the States. He is the oldest son of a very privileged family. His father was a diplomat in the British government when the British were still in charge of Sri Lanka, and then he became very important in the government after independence. And my father was sent as the favored eldest son. This is like a big deal when you're in Sri Lanka. You are the one who is sent to the West to get an advanced degree with the expectation and idea that you will either stay there and do very, very well for yourself, which is the usual thing. If any of you guys know Sri Lankans or Indians or, actually, that's why this ruling is so personal to me, because my father was one of those Indian, Sri Lankan guys with very dark complexion. So Sri Lankans, sometimes you can look at them and you can say, oh, this guy is definitely from Sri Lanka. Oftentimes there's a little lighter skin, not always, and you'll be amazed at how much the color difference is very at the forefront of people's minds in Sri Lanka, and I know this is also true having worked in Africa. If you happen to have lighter skin, you tend to have higher position. If any of you are aware of the civil war in Sri Lanka that went on for a very long time, it was between the majority Sinhalese, which is who I am, which kind of brings me shame, and the Tamil, who are darker skinned. And the Tamil are a minority and tend to be poorer, and are Hindu, and the Buddhists who are Sinhalese and are lighter. My aunt ran an Ayurvedic salon where she actually offered skin lightening treatments to her clients. So my father came to this country as a graduate student. He was supposed to be an aeronautical engineer. He dropped out also. I guess he set a precedent for me. He dropped out, and he was truly a jack of all trades. He was a bartender, he was a car mechanic, he laid carpet for a while. That was a really weird job for someone like him to do. I adored him. He was also an alcoholic, which probably was why he dropped out of school and got into a lot of trouble, actually. My mother, for other reasons, didn't achieve her expectations. She was supposed to be a classics, probably a professor of classics. She studied ancient Greek and Latin, but she happened to have bipolar disorder, so she didn't live up to her expectations either. And I will say that because of the chaos of living in a home with a bipolar mother and an alcoholic father, that was a huge reason why I dropped out of school. So I dropped out of school, and I took the GED, and I went to college in Kalamazoo, Michigan. The thing about that is, so I had this black father. In fact, at one point, he was trying to get a loan to set up a business to make yachts in Hermosa Beach, California. And you know who he applied to? The Muhammad Ali Foundation, as a black guy. And they couldn't say, like, no, you're not eligible, you're not African American, so he applied. And I was like, Dad, you're cheating. And I, with the name Janaki Kuruppu, despite the fact that I grew up on welfare, I dropped out of high school, I had a really chaotic upbringing, I was never in a million years going to be eligible for any kind of affirmative action. In fact, I was probably going to be a victim to a certain degree of reverse discrimination, because they would see my name and they would say, oh, it's one of those Asian kids who's got the tiger mom, which we didn't know about tiger moms when I was a kid, but my dad was a tiger dad, I promise you. So the Washington Post had this interesting article, personal stories of affirmative action emerge. And I was struck by this story of this guy who actually is Asian, Vincent Pan, co-executive director of Chinese for affirmative action, who attended Harvard in 1996. Understand that this suit against Harvard and UNC was actually headed by this, well, you can read all about it after Shabbat, but this guy who's a very conservative guy who's not Asian, actually, but he coalesced a group of Asian students to argue that they'd been reverse discriminated against. This guy, Vincent Pan, says, I did not have perfect SAT scores. I knew that, even then, these small elite campuses could fill their entire class with just valedictorians, with just people with perfect test scores. But I understood that there was more to not only my application, there was more to me. And so I feel personally devastated by the fact that we are potentially losing a mechanism that, yes, one of the arguments is this was supposed to be temporary. One of the arguments was that once the balance is corrected, we won't need it anymore. But we live in Baltimore. I don't live in Baltimore anymore, but I love Baltimore. We all live in Baltimore. We know. We see it every single day. We, in this room, are the privileged, and we need to speak out on behalf of those who are not. We cannot be like Balak and Moab and be so afraid of the other that we want to curse them. We have to be willing to extend ourselves, recognize our own blessings, and be willing to share. Shabbat Shalom.